Değerli konuklar, sevgili izleyiciler, Fikir Önderleri canlı yayınımıza hepiniz hoş geldiniz efendim. Öncelikle bu gecikme için sizden çok özür diliyoruz. Ufak bir teknik aksaklık yaşadık. Malumunuz yayınlarımız Instagram, YouTube ve Twitter'da aynı anda gerçekleşiyor. Ve özellikle YouTube ve Twitter dışında Instagram'a bu yayınları aktarmak için özel bir teknolojik altyapı kullanıyoruz. O yüzden de oradaki ufak bir sıkıntı nedeniyle sizi biraz geciktirdik. Kusurumuza bakmayın. Alıştınız artık ama ben bir kez daha söyleyeyim. Eğer ki bize soru sormak istiyorsanız bu 3 mecra içerisinde YouTube'u tercih etmenizi rica ediyoruz. YouTube'daki chat box'tan bize sorularınızı iletebilirsiniz. Ben de yeri geldiğinde değerli konuğumuzla sorularınızı paylaşmak ve ondan cevapları almak için elimden geleni yapacağım. Bugün yine çok değerli bir fikir önderi bizlerle birlikte. University of Virginia, Darden School of Business'tan Yael Grushka-Cockayne bizimle birlikte. Sevgili Yael özellikle proje yönetimi, Agile yapılar, davranış bilimleri ve davranış ekonomisi ve inovasyon üzerine çok ciddi çalışmalar yapıyor. Yael, welcome to the stream.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I'm glad to see you. I haven't seen you in a while, so it's nice to see your face, but I'm happy to be here and to talk to you today.
It is always nice to see you, Yael, as well. So you are right. We haven't catch up for a while, but I'm happy that we had this occasion for this. So let's start with those COVID things. How our COVID days are going for you? What are you doing throughout this pandemic?
Yeah, me and my family moved from the Boston area. We were living there for 2 years. We moved back to Virginia, to Charlottesville. So it's been busy as a family, like making sure that we have everything that we need. I have kids that had to get their schooling, the internet access up to speed and everything, but we're fine. We're healthy. We're staying, physically fit and trying to run and exercise when we can, doing a lot of stuff as a family. But yeah. We're doing okay. Yeah, we're doing okay.
The same stuff and same problems all over the world. Yeah, we have been also suffering from internet bandwidth thing, and also we are trying to keep up with our physical and mental health. But it's not an easy era to cope with. So hopefully we will stay safe and we will go through this. Let's start with our concept of Agile, because we have been talking so much about Agile. Agile organization structure has been a buzzword before the COVID, but with the COVID, we see a huge acceleration in terms of this, and we see lots of articles coming out of this. So what is your take with Agile perspective and Agile organizations?
So I think people use the word agile in different contexts. Indeed, it's being used more than ever before. If we thought that it was popular pre-COVID, it's definitely exploded post-COVID. And in different domains, it means slightly different things. But in general, the idea is about flexibility and nimbleness, right? Companies, either supply chains or organizations, their HR structure or their working habits, everything that we thought of previously as rigid is being called into question. And people want to be a lot more flexible, and they want to be able to switch and to change the way that they're thinking on the fly. And agility helps us get there. What does it mean? It means that we all need to be willing to change our processes and be willing to revisit our processes on a regular basis to find opportunities to improve. With project management, it's very concrete. What does Agile mean in the context of project management? In that context, when we talk about Agile, we typically talk about a changing scope. So as we develop something, very often it's with the context of software, but it doesn't have to be. Then we think about, okay, we're going to develop one component at a time, but give ourselves some flexibility to pivot as we learn more. So that's how it gets implemented and translated into a specific project area. In general, agility is always about adapting, right? I want to adapt my supply chain, meaning I need to have an ability to find new suppliers, new vendors, to ship things around the world in a different way, to source them from a different place. Organizations have to rethink the way that they communicate. We need to be agile in our communication capability. We might try one thing one day, but then decide to change the next. We're used to meeting face to face. We need to be agile and adapt. And I think that that's why it's so common around us, because as we face a lot of uncertainty today in all of our lives, professionally and personally, it's all about adapting and being flexible. And that's why it's everywhere.
Right. Yeah, you're totally right. It's everywhere, and we have been seeing a lot of debates going through if agile companies are performing better throughout this pandemic. What is your idea about that? Do you think in terms of organizations, in terms of project management mentality, in terms of processes approach, do you think agile companies respond faster and better to that pandemic, or more hierarchical companies have the advantage of being centralized and cope with that, especially the first phase of the crisis?
It's a great question. For me, if I distill some lessons learned from what I teach in project management, it's not so much about whether you're centralized and more traditional kind of hierarchical organization versus an agile organization. It's more around the shared purpose. If you can unify your employees or your community around a shared purpose, you'll probably be able to pivot and cope in a more dynamic way with whatever hardship you're faced. You know, what we faced in March, or here in the US, it was in March. I guess in Europe, it was maybe a little bit earlier in February. Yeah. At that moment in time, it was really about the shared purpose that allowed companies to execute and to progress. If they could get everybody on the same page and understand a vision for what they were trying to accomplish on a very near-term basis, they were able to get there. And in that way, it is somewhat agile because you're thinking, 2 weeks ahead, 3 weeks ahead. You're not thinking the next 2 years. You're being very short-term in terms of your planning. You're putting everybody under that sense of urgency. Something has to be done by the end of this sprint or by the end of this period. And you very much build a shared sense of purpose. And so even organizations that are more centralized, I've seen them execute very well if they took that spirit and said, okay, here's a team that's going to work in a very short-term perspective, very narrowly. We're not going to worry about long-term planning, but we're going to be very short-term focused. And we're going to give ourselves a very clear shared sense of purpose. And that's at the backbone of agile methodology, but that also was very helpful under the situation of crisis that we face.
Right. When we were talking about agile, let's say 2 years, 3 years ago, the examples that we are focusing on, or the best practices that we exemplify, is companies like Spotify, for instance, or Zappos, for instance. Yes. But now we start to see much more established or incumbent companies also moving to agile organizations. We have been talking about companies like BASF, for instance, or Volvo, for instance, moving to much more agile, or banks like ING, or telecom companies like Vodafone, especially here in Turkey. Do you believe that established companies with silo structures and lots of informal processes or cultural points can move effectively to agile organization?
Yeah, I've been having the same kind of conversations. Yesterday, I was on a call with a large pharmaceutical company that is heavily regulated, and typically, they talk about multi-year projects that are very slow because of the nature of the development of anything to do with drug development or pharmaceuticals. And even there, they describe how agile is coming in. It's coming in to deal with the novelty, if they want to innovate, if they want a new app to integrate with a new drug, to integrate with a certain device, all of that is still new. And so there they see opportunities to be agile. If, these days, the whole development of vaccines, while we know how to develop drugs and we know how to develop vaccines, the ones that the world is looking for right now in the moment are very different. They have to be done faster than ever. They have to be done bigger than ever to help the whole world get what they need. And so that's going to require, while we still have structure, that will require some nimbleness. And so agile almost like sits within the more traditional waterfall or critical path type analysis. And so I do think that it's not only certain organizations that can adapt. The only thing to keep in mind is that the agile implementation becomes a little bit more hybrid in nature. It's less proper agile as some folks might think about it, but it's more around finding opportunities to be short-term, to deploy more flexible methods and to allow yourself to change your direction and to navigate that scope and that clarity of the final product in a more ad hoc way. And so I think that companies are warming to it and they see the value in it. Even large new product development companies like you described, banks, service organizations, I think it's finding its way into many different industries that we may have originally not thought it would be applicable to.
Right. Yeah, we have a question from the audience. I think it's a very relevant time to shoot it to you. Our friend asks that, can we say that a company is agile once it responds quickly to a customer need?
Yeah, so the ultimate goal with Agile, or one of the main purposes, and if you go back to the original manifesto that came out of the software field when it was first conceptualized, that's over 20 or just about 20 years now, actually. It's coming to 20 years now. The original goal was to get closer to the customer, was to really have the customer integral to the development, integral to the project itself. I know that you've worked a lot with Gene Lidka, but it's that principle that it also relates to design thinking. It's user-centric development. And so the Agile idea was we're going to get feedback all along the way that we're developing the right product, that we're going in the right direction, and that the customer is interested. And the customer is going to be part of our team, basically. And so that is the gold star of Agile project management. It's having the customer really be part of the team. Every 2 weeks, the customer joins the conversations, gives feedback, helps, choose which new features are going to be put in to the development, gives feedback retrospectively on how the sprint went. The more involvement you can get from the end user, the more natural it will feel in terms of your efforts. And that is where holistically or in an ideal world where Agile goes. It's not always possible. And so I wouldn't rule it out in cases where it's a little harder to get. You can still kind of have the same Agile vision, but you need to remember that you're missing that customer voice and you should seek it out as often as you can. I've heard some companies substitute the customer voice with their sales team. It's not perfect. We all know that we can find ways in which that's not necessarily a good substitute, but it's good to hear from people who are closer to the customer and closer to the field, to the degree that you can.
Yeah. Regarding our articles about Agile, one of the things that I have seen is that Agile is all about creating value. Extra value or better value, if I may say. So it can be either customer that we are targeting, it can be either our employees that we are targeting, or it can be society or the greater good of people. So anything that we are targeting, we need to bring their ideas to the table and create the solution, create the value with our stakeholders. So this is the main philosophy behind the Agile. If you are an FMCG company, of course, customer becomes the most important stakeholder. But if we are an NGO, then the society becomes the most important stakeholder. If we are a B2B company, then supply chain management becomes the most important stakeholder. So I think sticking with stakeholder value and maximizing the good for doing good and doing well at the same time means a lot for Agile, I guess.
I totally agree with you. And you can see from your description, which was very accurate and very well stated, you can see from your description why it's so important to be in the moment and to have that feedback loop be very quick, meaning that's why they talk about, 2-week sprints or 3-week sprint, maybe 1-week sprint, meaning the iteration and the feedback from either the society or the stakeholders, and assessing that value is done on a regular basis. Think about the past year that we've experienced together, right? So this past year of 2020, if you're a company planning and working on some kind of product, think about how our needs have changed dramatically within this period. And for instance, I'll take academia, just because this is my job. I'm an academic. I'm a professor. I'm also an administrator now. I'm running programs. And if I think about our the way that we've evolved, it's been more agile than always. Typically, in March, I would set my entire plan for next year. I would say who teaches, when do they teach, and how are they teaching? Or me and the team would decide together. This year, we couldn't do that. In March, we had to pivot to move online. Everybody had to move online. By April, we were trying to decide how we're going to finish the year. In July, May, June, July, we were trying to figure out how are we going to start the new academic year. We didn't know. We had to be ready to pivot every moment. So we've invested, we had parallel teams working on different ideas at the same time in a very agile kind of way. We were meeting regularly to see how things are progressing. We were testing new ideas, and we were ready to pivot at any moment. In the US, in addition to the COVID stress, we also had a lot of social unrest, and we had to react in the moment and find opportunities for that feedback loop to say, society wants us to address issues of racial inequality. So how do you prepare yourself to constantly adapt to the value, to find the high value activity that you want to engage in? It really depends on the moment. And we were tested more than ever before around finding those value added activities for the moment that we're in. And that's the true nature of Agile.
Right. Another question is about the digital way of working we are experiencing here. You have also mentioned bringing purpose at the center of the strategy. You have also mentioned going agile, but now there is a reality that most of us are working remotely. We are not sitting at the office. So maybe a 15-minute of daily stand-up will be very fruitful in an office setting. But now people are out at their homes or other locations. So this is remote working time. Do you think this is an advantage or a disadvantage for becoming more agile or bringing or emphasizing purpose?
It's a good question. I mean, it's yet to be determined. I think overall, for becoming more agile, it's an advantage. So it gives us a lot more flexibility. Now, with flexibility, it also means that we have to find our own boundaries, but it does empower us to be able to do a lot of other things at the same time. So, if I have to drive somewhere, if I have to do something in my day, if I have to go and do a certain activity, I don't have to be as crude as I needed before in terms of I can take a call in the car, or I can watch a video recording of it afterwards, things that before I couldn't do. And so in a way, we're all more connected, even though we haven't seen each other physically for a long time. Now, that additional connectivity and that intensity is welcome by some, but it's also been taking some time to find its boundaries. We don't have the office, so why not talk on the weekends, or why not talk in the evening times? Why don't we start at 7 a.m.? Why do we have to wait until 8? All those things that we took for granted and those structures that we had in place are all being challenged. And in some cases, we can decide to leave them as they were. And in some cases, we can say, actually, for some families or people at home, we want to take the afternoon off to be with our kids, and we prefer to work in the evening. So there's new flexibility that we're empowering our employees to work with, which does mean that we gain extra flexibility, and it eases our way into Agile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As journalists, when we are preparing for an interview, we look for something that we call the silver bullet. Silver bullet is the question that is really hard to answer, or it is the most unstructured part of the concept that the interviewee is going to talk about. So when we are talking about agile organizations, the silver bullet is performance appraisals, the change in the organization. So if you want to shoot a speaker about talking about agile, the silver bullet question will be, how are you gonna reshuffle your HR processes? How are you gonna do the performance appraisals? How are you gonna convince mid-level managers that they are not going to lead 100 people? They have to give away their offices, and so forth. So looking at the HR perspective, how those issues of hierarchical organizations or siloed organizations will be resolved, because those are 50-year, 60-year-old structures that have been around and that are still working.
I think that, as you say, that is a silver bullet question. I think that it's a big one, and one that is probably going to be controversial, and my answer might not satisfy everybody. I do think that the move to Agile does require a new incentive system, a new way to think about incentive systems and performance. So for one, there's a very big shift from a more traditional structure to an Agile structure in terms of team-based incentives versus individual. So the conversation becomes more about how did the team perform? How did we perform as a group? As opposed to how did we perform as individuals? And so our work is a lot more, in some ways, tied to each other's performance, and we have more of an incentives to together accomplish our goal versus each one of us individually. So it's less, in that sense, it's less transactional, and to some degree, there's less conflicts among individuals, especially at the same level, because they're working together and they're rewarded together. Still, people do get to stand out. If you've done exceptional work helping your teammates, if you've progressed things on a regular basis or found solutions to problems that come up, let's say, in the daily stand-up, if you've identified really valuable ideas to put in the backlog, and those end up being very valuable features of the project, or very good developments, those are going to get celebrated, even in a context of Agile where you're working on a team-based approach. For the middle managers and those who are concerned, I would encourage them to think about Agile as a new set of opportunities for them as well. What the beauty of the system allows is for us to all constantly learn and redevelop ourselves. We can invest, we can be part of a team, we can learn very quickly in the field from the customers or whoever those end users are, whether internal employees or external. We can learn very quickly as to their needs, as to their desires. It keeps us current, it keeps us relevant. And as middle managers that sometimes in other worlds would have been removed from that, it keeps us really much closer to the final users, and it keeps us closer to the new things that are happening. And so we can grow and develop. We can move around teams. We can learn to block and tackle and to talk to the customer in a different way. I think it gives everybody a new set of tools and capabilities that we haven't necessarily had before in a very organic way.
Right.
And finally, maybe I'll add just one last thing about that. This, going back to my original comment around a shared sense of purpose, with the move to a more short-term, agile, flexible model, I think that there's a lot more buy-in. So there's a lot more passion, and we feel the urgency, and you feel satisfied because you're accomplishing goals on a very short-term basis. And you walk away from work saying, I've finished something meaningful and was helpful, and I can move on. And I think that sense of satisfaction addresses all levels of employees, the actual people who are doing the work, their managers, or those that are managing the projects, in a way that traditional structures don't.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's enough talk about Agile, because we can talk about Agile for hours and hours. So I would like to tap in other points as well. The other point that I would like to tap in is the decision making that we are behaving, going through really uncertain times, ambiguous times, and these times are not really the best times for effective decision making. But how do you see the approach of making good decisions throughout uncertainty?
It's hard. I think that people have to get comfortable with making decisions under uncertainty, and it's something that with practice, I think you get more comfortable with it for sure. I would argue that you probably get better with it as well, but you definitely get more comfortable with it. And at the beginning, it's very unusual. And again, I'll draw from my own personal experience, making decisions about, do we meet in person? Do we teach hybrid? Who's going to go into the classroom? How are we going to deliver? What courses are we going to offer? Those were really hard and stressful at the beginning of the COVID experience. And I think that we've all gotten a little bit better at thinking through the types of choices that we have, the trade-offs, and understanding that we can never get full clarity of the situation because the uncertainty will continue. And so we're more at ease with making decisions. And I don't know I'm pretty sure that this is true in Turkey as well, and you'll tell me, but here in the US, if you look at the newspaper and what I can tell internationally too, there's a lot more willingness on everybody's part to talk about uncertainty. You can see charts with interval, bands and confidence bands, and the uncertainty is descripted or you can picture it. It's like in a graph. People show you how uncertain things are. Nobody's committing, and people understand that there's things that we don't know. And that appreciation, people are using the language of probability a lot more than they've ever used before, and trying to understand it and trying to learn from it. And that I think is overall healthy for us, because maybe in the past we've thought that we're making decisions under situations of full knowledge, where as we've always had uncertainty that we face, life is uncertain. But now we'll be more comfortable with it. And I think we'll learn to evaluate the uncertainty, what it implies, and make decisions and just go ahead with it.
Right.
We can never find all the information that we need right now. There's just no way under the current circumstances that companies can make choices with full certainty. And so they're going to just have to be able to commit and move forward.
Yeah, actually, that was not something that that came our lives with pandemic. I was just looking for some articles in HBR's archive, and I ended up with a really good article about strategy under uncertainty, and it's really very relevant. And I was really shocked. I said, "Oh, such a great framework, such a great angle." And when I look at the date it is written, it was like 1993. So that 1993 article is really a perfect fit for what we are experiencing. So from time to time, we have been going through these cycles, but with the COVID, I think the momentum is so high that we need to figure it out. Is there a framework, or is there an approach or recipe which will help leaders to make better decisions throughout uncertainty? Are there a couple of highlights that we can emphasize?
Yeah, and so I wonder, I would love to see that article. So maybe afterwards you can post the link to the article.
Sure, I will do that.
I may know it, I may not, but all the tools that we teach in decision analysis, so tools related to decision trees, simulation, sensitivity analysis, scenario planning, these are all tools that help us expand our horizon and think about, best case scenarios, like what we hope would happen, but also very proactively and consciously think about those worst case scenarios and kind of expand our horizon beyond one average scenario or one base case scenario. Those are all tendencies that for years people in my field have been trying to encourage folks to move away from. Okay, it's called the flaw of averages. We can't just plan for one scenario. We need to plan for a whole variety. And I think that everybody, or many more companies and individuals and decision makers today, understand and kind of feel it on their own kind of, experience, that it's no longer okay to just plan for a single scenario moving forward. We need to understand the whole slew of options that we face, and we need to be comfortable moving forward, knowing that we've considered what's the worst that can happen, what's the best that can happen, and how do our decisions affect that. People are naturally thinking in that direction, right? Like that's what you see companies doing. And that comes into some of the idea of agility, is to build optionality along the way. If I know that I face a very uncertain situation and there's a big wide spectrum in my scenarios of what I could face, I'm going to give myself bailout opportunities, or I'm going to give myself a plan B opportunity. And those are all optionalities along the way. And that's more natural to think of in this context of the world that we face. But those tools have been around for ages. Like we've been teaching them at business schools for a long time. But it's just that now almost every decision that we face in a company has to be done under that light.
Right. Actually, one of the other articles really strongly emphasized that there's the question about how can we be better prepared for the future should be answered as there is not a single future. So there will be different versions of future. There will be different futures. So you have to be aware of the options, the alternatives, and you have to have plans for each of them. So when you see the trajectory is going to a certain one, then you can pivot and you can start to implement your plan regarding to that future. So it is really eye-opening for me. There is not a single future. There will be versions of future. So the leaders should be aware of what versions can be, how can future unfold in terms of these versions, and then try to be prepared to those versions in terms of their probabilities, maybe, if I may say. And you mentioned scenario analysis. You mentioned many different tools. We have also new cognitive technologies around, like AI, advanced analytics. So combining those tools with these new cognitive technologies, do you think we have better platforms to better anticipate what's going to come on?
Definitely our forecasting capabilities have improved, right? In the world of data, not everybody feels that right now. And I know that folks have a lot of doubt. And yet still, I would say that our overall capability to forecast the future has improved. We face highly uncertain times, and yet absorbing all of the information that is available and all of the information worldwide in such a transparent world that we live in, we are able to digest it way better than before. Now, it is hard. The choices are still hard. The trade-offs and the decisions that we are called to make are very difficult, which is why it's still not totally, it doesn't feel like we have it under control, because decisions are controversial and they require us to understand, you know, what exactly they manipulate and what are the implications. But yet still we have a better sense for predicting the future in many different ways. We don't all know exactly what's going to happen with the pandemic tomorrow. We don't all know exactly how the vaccine is going to help, but we have projections and we can start putting plans in place to kind of at least get us through it in a more comfortable way. Think about how much we as society in Turkey, in the US, around the world, how much we have actually learned and how we individually and holistically have grown since February and March, right? Like you and I can talk about things a lot more knowledgeably than we could before. We understand that if things get worse, we're going to have to shut down. If things get a little bit better, maybe there'll be some ease in the circumstance. We understand why. We understand the trade-offs. We're all a little bit more aware of the medical issues that are related to it. So we're all getting more of a grasp of the situation, even though in the moment it still feels overwhelming sometimes.
Right, I guess. By the way, I just posted the link for the article. I was mistaken by the year. It was 1997, not 1992. So 4 years
ago, yes.
4 years of mistake will be tolerated, I guess, by our viewers as well. Yeah, another area that you are also doing research is behavioral science and behavioral economy, if I may say. And we have been hearing a lot about changing behaviors throughout this COVID. Especially, we have been hearing a lot about the change in the behaviors of consumers. So from that context, what's your take? How structurally or how temporarily we have been seeing behavioral change, and is there any way to better analyze this?
I think it's fascinating because for years people in this field have studied choices and studied consumer behavior and studied attitude towards risk. And we've always used examples like the stock market or the casino or very specific domains to make certain conclusions or to draw certain insights. And in a way, we're living in times where there's almost like a live laboratory around us. There are so many daily choices that individuals are making that require a much more closer appreciation of the risk and tolerance for risk that enable researchers to do a lot more and to learn a lot more about individuals when really push comes to shove, right? When they're really challenged by something that at the downside, the risk is to our health, is to our safety, is to who we are, is to our lives. And not often in history, and I'm not saying that this is a good thing, I hope it goes away and it doesn't come back, but it is an opportunity to learn because these choices are real. These are real choices that individuals are making. These are not, undergraduates making choices in a lab for the sake of research. And so to some degree, I think that when it's over, and even before, I think already we are learning a lot more about human nature. Okay. Our desire to protect each other, our desire to interact, our desire to socialize. How do we help? How do we protect our mental health under these circumstances? What are we willing to do? And to what extent are we willing to trade, for instance, monetary reward for our lives, those are choices that people are making every day and are being challenged on. And so as a field, there's a lot of interesting experiments going on to study and to help draw some insights so we can later, moving forward, be better equipped to facilitate a society that has a mixture of individuals, right? If we understand what people care about and how they make choices, we will also be able to come up with prescriptions to better support our society.
Right.
And so, for instance, a lot of folks are talking about how does the communication of masking, what makes a good message, a powerful message? What is a message that people react to? What is a message that social distancing accomplishes? How do we create bonds and communities under those circumstances? That is all about the human decision-making and the behavioral aspect of our lives that in previous that we weren't able to study previously. And now we have an opportunity to dig deeper into it.
Right. I think the best part of this pandemic for the academics is that it's, as you have mentioned, it's like a living laboratory. And I think in 2 year, 3 year, 5 year time, when we look back, we will see a lot of quality research being done throughout what we are living through. So I think this is a really good upside for academics as well. Speaking of,
to some degree, yeah, to some degree, there's some challenges there. There's definitely some challenges there for sure. But
yeah, I guess so. Yeah, how about the idea of bringing behavioral scientists or behavioral economics within corporations? We have been hearing a lot about companies trying to better understand their stakeholders, their customers, or their employees, and we have been seeing good examples of teams, diverse teams, including behavioral scientists in them. So how can companies leverage the behavioral science in order to better create or propose value?
So I think it's a combination. I will add so there's a lot more awareness around behavioral science to begin with. So, Dick Thaler won the Nobel Prize a couple years ago. That, I think, reminded folks of the prominence of that work. Also, the emergence of data science and the ability to capture data. So we know a lot more about choices that are being made and behaviors from the field, and we're learning from data. There's, the world is in such a place where machine learning, data science, data-driven decision-making, those are all a lot more forces in companies that are pushing forward and dictating directions, like new products that get developed and new campaigns and new policies that get fostered. And so that, in a way, combined with the appreciation for behavioral, comes together, because now that we understand that behavioral science can be insightful and we have the ability to capture those preferences, we can put that all together to really distill the insights. And so you have machine learning, technical, computer science people that develop the algorithms that capture the data. And then you have the behavioral folks that add the interpretation or that suggest a change that would allow us to interpret things better. And so I think that that's a really interesting area. In some ways, data science is kind of the intersection of computer science, statistics, and some kind of domain expertise. In this case, it's going to be behavioral science as the expertise, because we're understanding the patterns of behavior that we see around us, or we're trying to interpret them and then make decisions based upon them. So there's a lot more appreciation for it. There's also more of a sense that interdisciplinary work is good in general. And so behavioral science or behavioral economics, if you go back enough, it was seen at the time when it started to emerge as some kind of interdisciplinary area between psychology and economics that not everybody was comfortable with. I think that these days there's a lot more appreciation for the fact that there's a lot of value in studying these things together in conjunction, and psychologists on their own and economists on their own are not able to get to the heart of phenomenon or use that insight to make prescriptions moving forward. And I think that these days we live in a world where we look for that interdisciplinary work. We look for, and we get inspired by interdisciplinary work. To some degree, behavioral economics can be useful in medical choices and trade-offs that are being made in the medical area, or by physicians or by patients about their own lives. And so I think that there's there's a hunger for that interdisciplinary work that is just going to continue to blossom and grow.
Right. Your words reminded me the great book by Richard Taylor, Misbehaving.
Misbehaving.
The title of the book is Misbehaving, and it's a tremendous retrospective about how behavioral economics and behavioral science has become a really important multidisciplinary area, starting from Kahneman's and Tversky's research about the behavior. It's really a tremendous book. I really recommend our viewers to read that. And another topic that we can touch, Yael, from your research is the innovation. So we talk about agility, we talk about new technologies, we talk about effective decision making. But throughout this year, the famous quote by Winston Churchill, "Do not spend a good crisis." So it is like there are lots of opportunities or windows of opportunities that are wide open. So looking at the innovation perspective, how do you see the windows of opportunities throughout these times, and what should innovators do in order to seize the moment?
Oh, there are so much innovation going on, and that's really one of the main, hopes and silver linings that I think most of us are getting from the current crisis, is really to focus on that innovation, because there's very little else to focus on. I miss my family, I want to travel, I miss a lot of things that we were used to, but focusing on the innovation is helpful because it gives us some hope. And indeed, we see that innovation is happening everywhere, and it's happening out of necessity, but it's stuff that will stick. So again, I'll give examples from my life right now as an academic. We installed and we're not alone. Many universities have gone ahead and installed new cameras in the room, new tracking cameras, new sound systems, we've put in a bunch of new projectors, we've put in new whiteboards, everything that allows us to deliver hybrid classroom. Now, we didn't feel the urge. We've been talking about it for years, but we never felt the urge to go ahead and do it before. And now we had to, and it's going to stay. So we're going to have advantages moving forward. There's innovation. Last week, I had a conversation with the CEO of a company called Affectiva that develop machine learning and AI to distill emotions from technology. So they help interpret the emotions of the individuals on camera via video, or even in a car through the glass. And the innovation that her company is leading is really tremendous. And she was on this trajectory before. And so it's not necessarily new. Her company's been around for 10 years, over 10 years now. But the opportunity right now, when the whole world is interacting online through their phones, through Zoom, and we need to enhance the way that we touch each other and connect in terms of the empathy and the emotions that we are able to exhibit and demonstrate and read through technology, they're higher than ever. The need is there more than ever. And so her company is really able to develop and offer solutions in the moment that are important to us right now, to solve or to help us through this crisis. Everything from drug development, communications, reading of data, even companies repurposing their manufacturing plants to come up with PPE equipment and masks, or to come up with ways in order to produce stuff socially distant. All of that is tremendous opportunity for innovation and growth, and a lot of it will stay with us long term. So it's about watching the world around you, seeing what works, trying many new things, and being willing to experiment and to try and say, where's the passion? What is ahead of you?
Yeah, I think these times are really suitable times for experimentation, trying new things, because lots of the assumptions that we think are norms have been disrupted. Lots of the playbooks have been rewritten, or lots of the things that we think are barriers to entry have been collapsed. So these are times when these are really interesting times to bring new ideas, to experiment, to fail, and to learn from these failures. Those are the things that we have been talking so much for so long. But now I think the environment is really suitable enough to try these things.
I think our whole attitude to the word failure, or our whole sentiment around what it means to fail, has totally changed, right? I think it's freed us from some previous like stigmas around failing, right? It feels, and in some way it's kind of nice, like I'm going to try something, and if it fails, you know, yes, I probably have a part in the failure, but it's also, there's a lot of other things that are going on. And so because I can't control all of the you know, external factors, and because there are so many you know, interactions, I need to just pick myself up and try again. And so that nimbleness is really helpful.
And also another really interesting dynamic throughout this pandemic is that it created a huge wave of collaboration, even collaboration within rivals. We see lots of companies coming together, working on vaccines. We see lots of companies coming together and producing PPE equipment. And those kind of collaborations, or those kind of shared responsibility approach, if this thing sticks, it will be a really good leverage for innovative products and services, I guess.
Yeah, I wish there was more of that. I agree with you. There's, you know, people have a lot more shared experiences now, right? We're all at home. We all feel the struggles of doing stuff online. We're very much internet dependent. We are very limited to what kind of socializing we can do. And that's true if you're in Istanbul. That's true if you're in London. That's true if you're in Charlottesville, Virginia. We all are going through this those tensions together. We're all feeling a little bit claustrophobic, and we're reinventing our relationships. And that's something that does bond us, and it encourages that collaboration. I've been giving some talks to many different schools. I'm talking to schools in Europe tomorrow, and I've talked to schools in New Mexico, in the US, in Canada, and all kinds of places around this online learning and hybrid learning, because everybody's going through it. It's not that one school has to suddenly figure it out. It's the whole field has to figure it out. And so there's shared experiences across competitors that really gives us an opportunity to, you know, be empathetic, find shared views and shared experiences, and learn and be inspired and get closer to each other. You know, again, I spoke to a school in India, in Germany. It just, the whole world is going through the same thing. So it kind of breaks those barriers that previously we may have had.
Right. Last but not least, how do you see the role of leader in this new era? What capabilities or what new definition should we bring around leadership?
Definitely empathetic. You know, it's really important to be open-minded, to be empathetic to what individuals are going through, to remain humane. Again, challenge yourself to be as flexible and nimble as you can be. So, you know, it's not that we have to forego any future planning. We have to, as leaders, plan, but understand that plans may have to change. So have backup plans and understand how you're going to deal with the uncertainty, and empower people to make choices on the ground. A lot of this is happening. There's too much work for any individual to do. So as leaders, I think we're even more than before challenged to rely on multiple individuals doing a lot of work in parallel, and helping us pivot as quickly as we need to. And so those are hard lessons. And sometimes it requires us to kind of, be a little bit more humble and be really adaptable, listen to people around us, surround ourselves with great individuals and teams, reach out to competitors, even though in the past we may have not been inclined to do that, to see what it is that we can do to better everybody and not just ourselves.
Thank you very much for your time and being with us today and sharing your ideas. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
You too. Thank you so much for inviting me. I enjoyed it.
Great. Sevgili izleyiciler, değerli konuklar, bugün University of Virginia Darden School of Business'tan Yael Grushka-Cockayne'i konuk ettik. Gerçekten farklı perspektiflerde hem Agile yöntemine, hem Agile organizasyon yapısı mantalitesine, hem davranış bilimlerine, hem inovasyona birçok noktaya dokunmaya çalıştık. Umarım sizler için de keyifli ve ilham verici bir oturum olmuştur. Hepinize iyi akşamlar diliyorum. Hepinize sağlıklı günler diliyorum efendim. Hoşça kalın.